So in this order, we have Kathy McNichol, Julia Holcomb, Matt Gottschalk, and Chris Anders. And if I do not pronounce your name correctly, I apologize in advance. Yes. Ready when you are, sir, ma'am.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Kathy McNichol from Sterling. I concur with the county staff on the proposed ordinance language on Section 68403E, property rights, Second Amendment rights, and the safety of my fellow county citizens are my considerations. The Commonwealth was correct in the opinion that previous language would create investigative challenges when incidents occur, and the county should be focusing on that issue. Even if this ordinance language passes tonight, I know this can all change in January with the new board, so I'm not sure this issue is dead yet. This ordinance has been debated for over 18 months. I've spoken on it twice at Input, in June and December of 2018. I don't even own property where I can shoot, but I cannot stand for restrictions of our private property and our Second Amendment rights. My June 2018 comments spoke to the knee-jerk reaction of then Senator Wexton and Favela, and delegates Boysko, Bell, Delaney, Murphy, and Reed demanding immediate action from our board on the Willisford incident. They wanted a total prohibition on the discharge of weapons in developed areas. That didn't happen because Republicans held a 6-3 majority on the board. This issue has now been debated through 2 election cycles. Loudoun Democrats running at all levels in 2019 benefited from millions of dollars from both anti-2A billionaires Bloomberg and Soros and their affiliated PACs pouring into state races. The result is a payback, a slew of unconstitutional bills filed in Richmond by the new Democrat majorities in the House and the Senate to include registration. This is an atrocity. Loudoun County staff that guides these types of ordinance changes will remain the same, but the board and the Commonwealth have changed. So in January and beyond, when the Commonwealth attorney is asked for an opinion on anything gun-related, remember her office was bought with $800,000 from George Soros. And the next time the Democratic leaders in Richmond pressure the board, perhaps they will get their payback from this board. I'm not good with that. No one should be good with that. I suspect myself and many others will be back next spring on this exact same issue, but I hope I'm wrong.
Thank you. Okay, this is literally the last time I'll say this before I recess the board. We do not clap and such in this boardroom. This is not new. This is the board's policy in our rules of order for every meeting, every time. I'm going to ask that you respect it, and if you can't, I'm going to recess our board. Thank you. Ma'am, you're next. Oh, I'm sorry. After Mr. Anders, it's Kent Gladstone. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Julia Holcomb. Well, we're off to the races, aren't we? Ms. McNichol has raised all the specters she can get her hands on of all those terrifying people like George Soros. And here I was going to come up here and speak for the quiet voice of reason. I'm going to try for the quiet voice of reason anyway. I actually agree with Mr. Buffing to some extent, and I don't as a rule. But to be honest, I don't see how anyone could object to this policy. How old are you when you learn to keep your hands to yourself? 5? Kindergarten? Maybe 4 if you go to preschool? You can't let your party's music disturb others at night. You can't keep a rooster in town because they'd intrude on other people's peace. You can't run a pulp mill where the smell bothers the neighbors. Why is anyone opposed to people's being asked to keep bullets on their own land? I don't get it. I don't understand all the, oh my goodness, they're going to come and grab our guns of Ms. McNichol, if I got that name right. I'm sorry if I made a mistake. But don't tell me it's because of the Second Amendment. Our most sacred right is enshrined in the First Amendment. It's the freedom of speech. And even it is not without restraints and controls. There are times when it can be limited. I teach a unit on it, so I know this, something I do. And so I really, genuinely, I'm not being disingenuous. I'm not trying to what's the word, be the devil's advocate or whatever it is. I don't get it. Why would you not know when you learned when you were 5 to keep your hands to yourself, to keep the projectiles from your firearms on your own land? I'm with Mr. Buffington. Any reasonable and thoughtful and properly using gun owner knows that already. They really shouldn't need to be told it, should they?
Matt Gottschalk, Chris Anders, Kent Gladstone, and Kent Gladstone and Chris Rowland. Matt, Gottschalk. Okay. Chris Anders, Kent Gladstone, Chris Rowland. Are you Mr. Anders?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm fighting my 4th kidney stone in 2 months right now. So, my name is Chris Anders. I'm the director of the Virginia Constitutional Conservatives, and I live in Lovettsville. Here is a stack I'll leave with the county of over 1,000 online petitions signed by residents of this county against any further restrictions on your right to hunt or shoot on private property. Because tyranny by the majority is nonetheless tyranny. It is truly a violation of good governance that I, as well as many here today, have to petition the county from infringing on our individual rights. For you see, in a republic, mob rule does not exist. However, that is exactly what some in this crowd believe they are here to do, to force you to vote away my individual liberty and private property rights. This violates the very nature of good governance. Virginia's founding fathers would be ashamed of us for what we're putting up with from our own government today. The right to life, liberty, and property is the reason government exists. These rights do not exist because of government. Government cannot protect criminals in jail from acts of violence, and so making a society a prison is never the answer. Existing state code and tort laws exist for seeking redress against anyone who has violated another's right to life, liberty, or property. But the ability to simply vote away those rights does not exist in a free and moral society. Our lives, our liberty, and our free will, and the ability to use them to obtain property come from our Creator, not from government. And praying at the altar of government for security always leads to further erosion of our God-given rights. And when immoral and unjust laws are created, we are morally bound to ignore them. And if this board, in its rush to appease the mob, chooses to violate these very basic rights, then they have turned the force of government and armed men with guns against the very purpose government was created. No election, no vote, and no action by an elected body can morally strip away pre-existing rights. You cannot vote away liberty, you cannot vote away property rights. For if you assume the power to tell an individual what they can or cannot do on their property, then private property no longer exists except at the whim of the state and its minions. So it is only lawful and proper for the board to vote against any new or increased regulations on hunting and shooting on private property. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Kent Gladstone, Chris Rowland, Michelle McHugh, and Arash Batremi. I hope I didn't mess your name up too much. I'm sorry. Mr. Gladstone, are you here? Mr. Gladstone?
Miss Gladstone.
It's I'm sorry?
Kent Gladstone.
Is that you?
Kent is my name.
Okay, hello.
Born
you.
name. Anyway, I just wanted to start out with gun shooters have 3 golden rules. Just for those who don't shoot, we always know what's behind the target. We never point at anything we don't intend to shoot. And we don't put our fingers on the trigger until we're ready to shoot. And if we follow these rules, I think every other law in the country should follow suit. I think visiting this issue is a precursor to the future. I think we're just going through an exercise right now. The board already has sent wording to the Virginia State Legislature about red flag laws, which I personally think are a really bad idea. I think they're ill-conceived. I don't think they're going to solve the problem because there's more than one way to commit suicide, and guns not the only way. So unless you want to take people's cars away, ropes, knives, whatever else way of doing that I don't know what it is. Anyway, I'm in agreement with Mr. Buffington and Mr. Bona about the wording. I mean, it's just wording right now. It's not going to change much of anything. I'm just worried about the future. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Chris Rowland, Michelle McHugh, and Arash Barami, I do believe that's what it is. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, board. My name is Chris Rowland, and I live out in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road. And we are here today to discuss whether the language impacting discharge of firearms on private property should be changed in an existing ordinance because some people did something. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt or killed as a result, and I honestly mean that. The penalties of having shot somebody else are quite high, and the motivation is enough to prevent people from actually being irresponsible with firearms. Interestingly enough, being responsible with automobiles has equally high monetary fines, subject to imprisonment, forfeiture of rights. It's not enough to prevent people from drinking and driving. It's odd that from 2013 to December 1st, 2019, there have been 1,612 incidents of DUI, 31 fatalities, and 991 injuries. I stand here before you as a victim and represent the injured from 2014. My daughter had nightmares for months about dying in a fiery car crash and being engulfed in flames. From January 1st of 2019 to December 1st of 2019, there have been 204 vehicular incidents resulting from alcohol consumption. Of those 204, one has resulted in a fatality with 174 injuries. I would like to contrast those numbers with the 5 incidents of stray bullets where 8 houses were hit with 1 minor injury in an 8-month time span. That is what got us here today. Now, by a show of hands, who within the Board of Supervisors has proposed and helped pass legislation in the County of Loudoun that has passed more restrictive laws than existing state code as it relates to driving intoxicated in the county and increasing the penalties for homicide, manslaughter, or personal injury? By a show of hands, please.
We don't do that, sir.
Okay, well, let the record know you all abstained. I am appalled, as many of the people who are present today, that the Board of Supervisors is focusing on something as insignificant as stray bullets than the larger problem that costs and impacts every citizen of Loudoun County on an every other day basis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Michelle McHugh, Ash, I think it's Arash Barami, Christopher Karinsky, and Lenneth Armstrong. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Michelle McHugh. Thank you for listening to us here tonight. My talk is most on the Second Amendment, which this resolution is the basis of removing some of our Second Amendment rights. I'm using my First Amendment right, like the other lady very condescendingly talked about, for me and my fellow citizens to talk about our rights given to us by the Second Amendment to right to bear arms. For those who don't know the exact wording of the Second Amendment, it states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In light of that document, why is this agenda even in front of us? You're attempting to change a document that has been in front of us for over 240 years and has worked. It concerns me and many others that the board, with some new returning members and some of the old members, that one of the first agendas here is removing the rights that's directly given to us in the Bill of Rights. Why aren't you addressing gang violence? Why aren't you addressing, as the gentleman said before, drunk driving? Why aren't you removing guns from criminals? Fun fact, years ago I lived in the Algonquian district, just near an elementary school. I found out that MS-13 lived in a townhouse 1 street away from me. Why aren't we going after something like that? what you want to do is legalize and change parts of the Second Amendment's rights that have been given to us to both bear and to use the legal use of those arms. The police cannot be everywhere. What you guys have already stated in this amendment, what you want to pass, is going to be a legal issue for the police to decide. It's not something that you can legislate. By removing the right to bear arms, no matter how small an effort you start with, where do you draw the line? Who draws that line? And where do you end? Without the legal, many of the mass shootings where I'm sure a lot of the people who are against gun rights are talking about all these mass shootings, how many of them have happened in gun-free zones? How about the shooting down in Pensacola, where the gentleman, had he had his gun, could have stopped the attack? My time is up.
Thank you, ma'am. Arash Barami, Christopher Karinsky, Lenneth Armstrong, and Guy Podacek. Good evening.
Good evening, Board. I'm here tonight to implore you to give up on this ridiculous overreach of power and attempted breach of the sanctity of private property rights. Rather, I would ask that you focus your energy on passing a resolution unanimously urging the Sheriff of Loudoun County to declare Loudoun County a Second Amendment sanctuary. As the Director of State Operations for the Virginia Constitutional Conservatives, I also strongly urge you to join the over 78 other counties, cities, and towns which have already passed resolutions or ordinances declaring themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. In other words, I urge you to abide the oaths you have all sworn to support, protect, and defend the Constitution of these United States, as well as the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Second Amendment states, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Article 6 states, this Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. Do not let cheap attorneys in expensive suits fool you in Richmond. Any attempt to violate the constitutionally protected natural rights of the citizens of this great Commonwealth is an illegal act. Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242, states in no uncertain terms, whoever, under the color of any law, willfully subjects any person in any state to the deprivation of any rights protected by the Constitution shall be imprisoned not more than 1 year. If bodily injury results from this abuse of power, or if it involves the threat of a use of a dangerous weapon, they shall be imprisoned not more than 10 years. And if death results, or it includes an attempt to kidnap, or an attempt to kill, this person shall be sentenced to death. Seeing as how the inevitable enforcement of any red flag law, or any other unconstitutional firearm-related law, would include law enforcement serving illegal warrants while carrying dangerous weapons and issuing multiple threats of both bodily harm and kidnapping, any participating law enforcement officer is therefore willfully committing a high crime punishable by death. This is the perilous position you, the Board, want to put our county law enforcement in. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, obstructed, limited, or in any other way hindered. That's not a suggestion. That's the supreme law of this country, and those who violate it will be held to account. Thank you. May God bless the Commonwealth of Virginia, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
Thank you, sir. Christopher Karinsky, Lenneth Armstrong, Guy Podacek, and William Himes. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board about proposed changes to County Ordinance 684, Section 3, specifically the proposal to mandate construction of berms on private property. I address you as a nearly 12-year volunteer NRA firearms instructor at a local range. As an instructor, firearms safety is a topic with which I am very familiar and which I and the other volunteer instructors emphasize throughout all the NRA firearms safety courses, as required by the NRA course syllabi. Berms would be exceptionally difficult to implement and enforce. How would the county define berm standards? How would the county define compliance with those standards? How would LCSO investigate compliance with those standards? What ammunition calibers would be allowed on any given berm? Would different designs be required for different calibers? How would hunting be affected, since the prolific deer of Loudoun County cannot be expected to courteously stand directly in front of a berm? And of course, the presence of a berm alone cannot guarantee that every round will in fact impact the berm. One of the fundamental safety rules of using firearms is to know your target and what is beyond. I urge the board to reject any further consideration of burn requirements under Ordinance 684, Section 3, and to recommit to a public education effort emphasizing firearm safety training. I also would like to take the opportunity to encourage the board to reconsider its recent rejection of a Loudoun County Second Amendment sanctuary status. As of this morning, there are 78 sanctuary localities out of a total of 133 in Virginia. This shows the strength and determination of freedom-loving Virginians who oppose the extreme attempts to deprive us of our God-given rights, which are merely affirmed by the Constitution and not granted by the Constitution or any human being, particularly a politician. Indeed, it is a sacred duty of leaders in government to protect our rights and not in any way infringe upon or diminish them. Some on this board commented on a recent failed attempt to pass a sanctuary resolution, characterizing it as a, quote, social issue, unquote, pushing it off, stating that lobbying efforts should focus upon the General Assembly. The Second Amendment is anything but a social issue. It is a natural rights issue recognized by the U.S. Constitution and Virginia Constitution. The incredibly extreme pre-filed firearms-related bills in the General Assembly, without question, infringing on natural rights crucial to defend ourselves against anyone who would attempt to harm us and our families. And I see I'm out of time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Lyneth Armstrong, Guy Podacek, William Himes, followed by Stephanie Monroe. Good evening, sir. Did I say your name right, Lyneth?
Lyneth, yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, board members, my name is Lenny Armstrong. I am a proud taxpayer of Leesburg. My family and I have lived in Loudoun County since 1995. I was born and raised in Western Fairfax as I was pushed out. Now with the proposed resolutions, 684 needs to be resolved tonight. Let's see, this is in no matter a future law that will be enforceable as the laws that are already on our books. Let's see, which, and no matter will this be stopping, let's see, which, sorry, I'm not a good speaker.
That's okay. Take your time.
Which this is already about, is the stopping of discharging of any fire alarms on private land, pushing the agenda towards the anti-gun and anti-Second Amendment rights. There are already many laws on the books here in Loudoun County, as well as the great Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia Law 18.2-5601. Basically, the reckless use of a firearm. Like it's been stated before, I've been shooting since I was 4 and 5 years old as my kids and as I'm teaching my grandchildren now. See, finger, shoot. That's, you know where that bullet goes. There are laws on the books now that no matter what, you're responsible for that bullet. That bullet is me. If you don't see where it goes, you don't shoot. And that's what I've always taught my kids as I was taught. Just as many here, let's see, serve and change used in Loudoun County. The proposed amendment by the board will only deem control of the citizens of the county. My time's up. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. So next we have Guy Podacek, followed by William Himes, Stephanie Monroe, and George. You know, I know George. I know who you are, and I always get your last name wrong. So I'm going to spell it and not attempt to say it because I get it wrong every time, and I apologize. It's A.G. Agamirium. Thank you, sir. Guy Podacek. Good evening.
Good evening, Chair Randall, current members of the board. Prior to moving to Loudoun County 15 years ago, I lived in Maricopa County in Arizona. I was a police officer for the city of Phoenix. In 1999, Maricopa County was also having an issue with reckless discharge of firearms. and leading to the death of a 14-year-old girl in 1999 because of a stray round. That led to the Republican-controlled Arizona legislature, in partnership with the NRA, raising the penalty for reckless discharge of a firearm from a misdemeanor to a felony. And local municipalities in Maricopa have successfully used that statute to locate and prosecute reckless firearm use, to the extent of even putting up listening devices that triangulated the source of the shooting so that they could execute or prosecute the offenders. As others have referenced, Virginia has a similar statute on the books, but it has not seemed to have stemmed the rising reckless use of firearms within Loudoun County. As our population has increased, it seems that so has reckless use of firearms. I'm still a gun owner. As others have stated, the fourth fundamental rule is know your target and what's behind it. I appreciate Supervisor Buffington for bringing that up, and I believe this ordinance goes a long way towards making sure responsible gun owners are truly responsible gun owners. So I urge the board to support the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ponacek. William Himes, Stephanie Monroe, and George Aguimariam. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William Himes. I have been a Loudoun County resident for just short of 15 years, spanning from Purcellville to Ashburn. I'm here tonight to voice my disapproval for the board's proposed law to ban shooting and hunting on private property. Before I begin, I would like you to say private property to yourself and consider exactly what that means. Most don't find it a particularly hard concept to grasp. Loudoun County has a long history of hunting and shooting sports, and throughout its history has been a safe place to do so. The proposition of this law, as I'm sure you know, has arisen primarily from only one incident where an individual claims to have been struck by a projectile from a recreational shooter. There are hundreds of landowners in the area who shoot and have been shooting on their property for decades and pose absolutely no harm to any person or property in their vicinity. Of course, I am in agreement that a proper berm or backstop must be maintained and all proper gun safety rules must be followed at all times. However, I do not believe the county should impede these Virginians from their right to exercise their freedoms on their private property in any sense. Furthermore, I believe the county should not waste any time, money, or resources enforcing laws that breach the foundation of our state or nation's constitution. For this reason, I propose that you, our Board of Supervisors, make provisions for Loudoun County to become Second Amendment sanctuary. We as a state and as a nation are on the brink of making a massive mistake, on the same scale of the failures known as prohibition or the war on drugs. If we adopt the laws proposed by our civil servants in Richmond, who see themselves as our handlers, hundreds of thousands of law-abiding, hard-working, and all-around good citizens of our state will become felons at the stroke of a pen. While these laws may seem well-intended for those self-righteous, misguided, and misinformed lawmakers who see us as subjects, it seems clear that this will only result in the same side effects of prohibition or today's war on drugs, by causing crime rates to increase, the creation of a black market, and the same systematic oppression we have seen with minorities in the war on drugs. In closing, I ask that you take a look back at our state's history. Our founding fathers endured hell a mere 243 years ago and fought the world's most powerful nation at the time for these inalienable rights to ensure us a free nation, a nation that began right here in Virginia. Take a look at the flag behind you, look closely at the image before you, and most importantly, the three powerful words, Sic Semper Tyrannis, and remember what that means. Think about how we as Virginians earned that flag. Think about the position you're in today and how and who we fought to have these three words on our illustrious state flag hundreds of years ago. I urge all you council members to stand with your constituents today and make our country a sanctuary for the Second Amendment. I'm out of time. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, sir. Loudoun, I have to step off the dais for a minute. My mom called. She's been ill, so I won't actually take this call. I'm going to hand this to Mr. Bona. Mr. Bona, we're on Stephanie Monroe, and I'm trying to call them 4 people in advance so they can hear us in the other room. I will be back on the dais as soon as I possibly can.
You should always answer
Thank
when
you.
your mother calls.
We should.
Okay. Our next speaker is Stephen Monroe, to be followed by George Melick. Help me out. Agamarian, to be followed by Wally Bunya, to be followed by Josh Compton. Welcome, Mr. Monroe.
Thank you. To our elected officials, I am Stephen Monroe, a fourth-generation landowner and property taxpayer of my farm here in Loudoun County that was purchased by my great-grandfather over 100 years ago. I enjoy farming, tending to the land. I, family, and friends also enjoy hunting and shooting on the property, and do so in a safe, respectful manner to any and all peoples. It is your job as the elected leaders of this, a free nation, to uphold the laws that were put in place by the founding fathers of the United States of America, the Constitution, Second Amendment, Bill of Rights. This is necessary to always be a free nation. This nation was founded on the Word of God, His Christ, freedom for all people to have the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, protection of one's family and property. Freedom only stays freedom by the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The very existence of this country depends on the freedom of the people. Americans fought the tyrants of England for these rights it seems you're so willing to erase. Our county was on the very edge of non-existence when, due to that tyrannical foreign nation who was intent on being our law and rulers, the sons and daughters of America fought, bled, and died for the very freedoms that we see now are upon the chopping block of tyranny again. And if the government becomes destructive to these laws, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Criminals will always be able to attain weapons that they would use to do their evils. We who obey the laws of the land will be at odds against them in that day. If one innocent life is lost due to not being able to protect oneself, due to your works against the taxpayer of our rights to keep and bear arms, then you, our elected leaders, are worse than the criminals. Thank you.
George Mellick, Egamarian. Folks, let's hold the clapping, please. George Mellick, Egamarian, Wally Bunya, Josh Compton, Michael Schaefer.
Good evening. My name is George Mellick Agamarian. I have given a little handout to your staff. You should be getting it soon, and it is a picture of Malcolm X. Take a good look at this picture. This is Malcolm X in 1964, on the lookout for lynching mobs and assassins. He's holding a true assault rifle, the M1 Garand, with two 30-round magazines taped together. A year later, his house was firebombed. Holding that rifle, he ran with his family outside for safety. Here's a history lesson. The only reason we have ended segregation and the Jim Crow laws in the 1960s is because civil rights activists had guns and carried them and used them. Here's another history lesson. The first job of the Ku Klux Klan was to ride around to disarm free blacks right after the Civil War. Once the KKK disarmed them, they went back to lynch them. Now, I'm here to ask this board to explain why you're pushing racist gun control decrees on Loudoun residents, especially you, Coran, and Phyllis Randall, who ran out of the room. You are doing the work of the KKK. Yes, I said it, the KKK. You two owe your seats on this board to the countless thousands of civil rights activists who fought for justice. If not for their sacrifice, you would still be riding in the back of the bus. And now, with these ordinances, these incremental steps, you are turning back the clock to the bad old days. With this proposal, you're making people's rights to own and use their property into a crime, just like making a right to free speech into a crime, or exercising religion into a crime, or the right to vote into a crime. I urge this board to reject these racist gun control proposals, reject this ordinance.
Thank you, sir, for exercising your First Amendment right. Wally Bunya, Josh Compton, Michael Schaefer, and Gregory Vuntken. Wally Bunya? Bunya. All right, Josh Compton, Michael Schaefer, Gregory Vuntken, and Igor Volovic. We have Josh Compton. All right, Michael Schaefer, Gregory Vuntken, Igor Volovic, and George Conrad. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Good evening.
My name is Mike Schaefer. I live in Ashburn. I appreciate this time tonight. I'm here to speak to the agenda item number 1 related to the discharge of firearms on private property. I oppose this proposed change to the law not because I hunt. I'm not a hunter. Not because I want to target shoot in my backyard. I live in Ashburn. I oppose this bill and others like it because they represent the subtle yet consistent erosion of our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Of course, the Second Amendment was not designed to protect our ability to hunt or to target shoot. It was designed to protect our ability to protect ourselves. And let me be clear about this. When I talk about personal protection, I mean protection from each and every one of you, and protection from your colleagues in Richmond, and protection from your colleagues in Washington, D.C. Supporters of this proposal and others like it, I believe, do have a sincere interest in public safety, particularly the safety of our children. But, you know, as a parent myself, I'm certainly sympathetic to that cause. But chipping away at our God-given Second Amendment rights is exactly the wrong approach to protecting public safety. And, you know, history is replete with examples of where this has gone terribly wrong. Ukraine, 1929. Poland, 1939. China, 1947. Cambodia, 1975. And in each one of these cases, men, women, and children were disarmed and then subsequently slaughtered by their governments. You know, the lessons of history are clear, and yet here in this community, there are people, including people in this dais, who are practically giddy at the prospect of having each and every one of us abdicate our God-given rights to protect ourselves against an increasingly authoritarian state. And I see that my time is almost up, so I'll end with this. In 1755, in a letter to the colonial governor of Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin wrote these words: "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." The Founding Fathers understood that freedom is never free, that liberty will always come at a cost. And so I oppose this bill and others like it that would infringe upon our Second Amendment rights, because I will not give up essential liberty. And I ask my friends and neighbors of Loudoun County to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you all for allowing me to step off the dais for a second. Supervisors, we are going to speaker 19. We have 45 speakers. We will take a break at about speaker 24, 25, somewhere in there, okay? So the next speakers are Gregory Botcom, Igor Volovic, George Conrad, and Tom Lindsay. Good evening, sir.
Gregory Voitkin. I speak with a Yankee accent. If you need a translator, find one. I'm an independent conservative. I'm concerned about the amendments pertaining to the discharge of firearms and the impact it has on the property rights of this county. The amendments under consideration, in my humble opinion, will not improve the safety or stop the type of firearm violations that had been prima facie in letting us look at this. In short, the current ordinances on the books are more than adequate to address violations. Increased restrictions such as 50 yards to 100 yards, et cetera, really put on challenges to the landowners. And it only goes to increase the probability of more violations coming on the books, specifically these two. Because where does that round go? I disagree with a statement on which way the bullet's going to land in that amendment. Why do you, the Board of Supervisors, wish to punish the innocent, law-abiding citizens by taking away and restricting property rights because someone in some crowded counties took stupid pills because they don't know how to handle a weapon and violate the current laws? The amendments as proposed take away the constitutional rights of the innocent. The Second Amendment, we've heard right now, the right of people to bear arms, clearly is stated. Article 1, Section 13 of the Virginia Constitution clearly states, the people have the right to bear arms in their defense and security. There's already something on Virginia books. This assembly is looking to ram legislation into law, shredding property rights. I'm a proud pro-gun Virginian, now that I've moved down here from Yankeeville, and will hold you politically accountable for any attempts to take away our property rights. Thank you very much. Have a very happy Christmas.
Thank you, sir. Igor Bolovic, George Conrad, Tom Lindsay, and Veronica Slotsky. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. My name is Igor Bolovic. I'm a resident of Leesburg. I'm a twice Virginian by choice. Didn't have to be here, but we came back both times. We choose to live here, and we love it here. First, I'd like to welcome our out-of-state guests in their red shirts, appropriately dressed. Moms Demand Action, thank you for being here. A lot of people don't know that Moms Demand Action actually is a subsidiary of Everytown for Gun Safety. And I think gun safety is something we can all agree on, and I certainly am a big supporter, as many of us are, for gun safety. Now, gun safety requires gun safety training. And training means training our youth to respect firearms and use them properly and responsibly, so they don't get all their ideas about guns from violent movies and TV. Training our law enforcement and first responders to be more proficient at stopping lethal active threats. Training our most vulnerable citizens and those susceptible to crimes of violence, such as women and members of at-risk populations, like our religious, ethnic, and LGBT minority communities. Yesterday's violent attack against the Jewish community in New Jersey by homegrown domestic terrorists highlights the urgent and dire need of vulnerable populations to be trained and equipped to credibly and capably defend themselves against such barbaric and violent acts. Of course, training in the responsible and proficient use of firearms for self-defense requires actually using live ammunition. I think we all agree on that. That means firing your guns in a responsible, safe, and secure manner. And thus we will run headlong into the newly proposed amendment to County Ordinance 68403, paragraph E. A projectile leaving the boundaries of the property or parcel shall be prima facie evidence of a violation of this section. I have a serious question. How do you propose to actually enforce that? If it doesn't hit anything or anyone, how would you know that a bullet left somebody's property or parcel? Are you installing shot spotter everywhere in the county? That's 200,000 acres. We can do that. It'll cost about $18.7 million per year. Do we have it in the budget? Is that something that's on the agenda right now? You're trying to track individual bullets and gunshots. We're not D.C. We're not Chicago. Do you propose to actually do this across 200,000 acres? Because that's kind of what we're talking about here. Tracking individual projectiles, figuring out where they land, where they fly through. You want to install radar on everybody's property? That's unreasonable. It's unrealistic. And to what end? What is it planning to accomplish? We have laws on the books right now that work. In fact, the woman who was grazed, the man who did it was charged last September. He was criminally indicted. Laws work. We don't need another one. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. George Conrad, followed by Tom Lindsay, Veronica Slotsky, and Kimberly LaFave. I think I said that correct. Mr. Conrad? Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I'm not a public speaker, so I'll try and do my best. I'm fourth generation, raised on a 200-acre farm in Luckett's. My kids were the fifth. I've been brought up with a long tradition of hunting and shooting guns. We shoot safely. My neighbors don't shoot at me, and I don't shoot at them. I'd love to be able to teach my grandson the same skills my father taught me and I taught my children. The more restrictions you put on us, the less chance I have of doing that. I really would like to see an area where Loudoun can hang on to our heritage, hang on to our traditions, and I feel like you are really trying to push that out. You're really trying to push out rural Loudoun. As a farmer, I really feel the pressure that you're trying to tell me, get out of town. With guns, everybody knows to shoot safely. Requiring county-approved berms is just an unexpected and unnecessary expense to to property owners, and I feel that a lot of us can't afford to do that. I've never shot at a public range and really have no desire to. When I hunt and fish on my property and shoot guns, it's a family event. It's a community event. I have friends, neighbors that I've hunted with all my life. We get together, we tell stories, and we pass traditions on. Please do not stop that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Tom Lindsay, Veronica Slotsky, Kimberly LaFave, and Mark Farage. Tom Lindsay, Lindsey. No, okay. Veronica Slotsky, Kimberly LaFave, Mark Farage, and Dan Brubaker. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Veronica Slutsky. I'm a physician who values life above all else. I live and practice medicine in Fairfax, but I train at Silver Eagle and my friend's farm here in Loudoun County. I'd like to discuss my activities as they pertain to the ordinance being discussed. A few years ago, I didn't know how to use a gun. A patient who was addicted to a certain medication that I refused to prescribe threatened to kill me. DC police were unable to keep him in jail because he had not yet acted on his threat. The incident forced me to learn to defend myself with firearms. I pursued training, and now I help train others. And now I run a Jewish firearms self-defense group whose members train on a private farm here in Loudoun County. The need for such a group is obvious, given recent synagogue attacks, and just days ago, a targeted anti-Semitic attack on a Jewish restaurant in New Jersey that left multiple people dead. While training on the farm, we are extremely careful to follow the basic safety rule of know your target and what's behind it. It's unacceptable for innocent people to be harmed during training. However, harming others and their property is already illegal, and I feel this ordinance is redundant. I'm concerned that the ordinance can be used to justify limitations on groups like mine simply because a neighbor might be against the Second Amendment or armed Jews. Therefore, I urge you to oppose this ordinance and also the newly proposed Bill 64, which would limit firearms training and make everyone less safe. I encourage the county to devote more resources to promote firearms training instead. I also want to say that I came to this country as a child from the Soviet Union, where people, including members of my own family, were imprisoned and tortured. Other family members perished defenseless in the Holocaust. I ask you to stand for the Second Amendment, not only for us, but for future generations as a safeguard against tyranny. I'd like to read you a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the author of the Gulag Archipelago. And how we burned in the camps later, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive or had to say goodbye to his family? Or if during periods of mass arrests, as for example in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang at the downstairs door and at every step of the staircase, but had understood they had nothing left to lose and had boldly sat up in the downstairs hall in ambush of a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, whatever else was at hand.
Ma'am.
The organs would quickly have suffered a shortage of officers, and the entire machine would have come to a halt.
I'm going to stop you now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Kimberly LaFave, Mark Farage, and Dan Brubaker is where we will stop before we take a break, but then I will list the next 4 names that will come after that. Good evening, ma'am.
My name is Kimberly LaFave. I'm a proud member of Veronica's group. I'm also a mother and grandmother, a 40-year resident of Virginia, and a 20-year resident of Western Loudoun County. And I am not a party line voter. I am a lifelong gun owner, a firearms instructor, and a chief range safety officer. My daughter Emily, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, and I lead the Loudoun County chapter of the Well-Armed Woman, a nonprofit organization formed to educate, equip, and empower women in the use of firearms for self-defense. While I support the dedication of professionals we call the first responders, the reality is that every person in this room, including all of you, is the actual first responder to any crisis that occurs to you or in your presence. Preparation requires training. We as citizens shall not abdicate this obligation, nor should the government limit our ability to responsibly train or the resources available to us to protect ourselves, our families, and our community. I do not believe this to be an extremist position. In 2012, guests on my property were involved in a domestic dispute. Not until after the husband had fired off a shotgun inside their apartment was the wife, beaten and choked, able to escape to the safety of my home, myself, and my firearm, which never assaulted anyone but would become illegal under Senate Bill number 16. I called 911. I waited 30 minutes for deputies to arrive. Despite the fact that it is already illegal to fire a gun inside a residence, it is already illegal to use a firearm while committing a crime, that the prosecutor had the gun, the shell casings, evidence of the damage, and the perpetrator, all gun charges were dropped. He was convicted of only one unrelated misdemeanor. Why are we constantly trying to add new laws when the laws we already have are not vigorously prosecuted? The common denominator of all violent crime is people, not guns. We have a people problem, not a gun problem. Nevertheless, I appreciate that 684 will continue to allow me to safely train on my property. As a firearms instructor, I teach all my students to know their target and what is beyond it. Please know that there are many, many women, moms and grandmas watching you in this room in Loudoun County and Virginia who will continue to fight for our rights to take action in the face of danger. In the hands of the prepared and lawful citizens, guns do save lives. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And Emily, thank you for your service. Mark Lafarge. Thank you. And then for this, before we take a break, Dan Brubaker will be our last speaker. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Madam Chair. May I make a statement due to the fact that I sit on the Loudoun board before making my public comments?
I'm sorry?
I sit on the Loudoun board and need to make a disclosure before making my public comment.
Oh, yes. Which, no, it's not. Which board do you sit on?
Disability Services Board.
Thank you, sir. You're not representing them here today?
Yes, ma'am, that's
okay,
correct.
you may go, sir. Thank you.
Great. My name is Mark Farage. I'm a resident of the Greens at Willisford and have been since moving to Loudoun County in March of 2019. I'm also newly appointed to the board, Disability Services Board, and I appreciate the supervisors who voted for my appointment. Today I'm here to discuss, obviously, 684-03. In preparing these comments, I have read over 100 pages of Loudoun County materials, everything from presentations from the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office to the Firearms Discharge Working Group. In that context, what I can tell you is that after all of this material, we are trying to solve a problem that is minuscule at best and does not really impact that many people. The purpose of this board, as always, is to make sure that we are serving the people in a conscientious, ethical, and professional manner. In doing so, we should ensure that we're dedicating our time and our energy in the most effective manner possible. I offer that the time, energy, and resources dedicated to this endeavor has been anything but. In May of 2018, this endeavor was started by the board in response to what was described as a near tragedy, which was related to a May 6, 2018 event where bullets impacted several homes within Willisford. No individuals were hit, nor were there reports of such. Thus, one could argue that what was described as a near tragedy was anything but. In fact, in June of 2018, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office indicated that there are no CFS trends indicating a systemic issue with firearms discharge in the county. This should have been the end of the issue. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Instead, the board created a working group, suggested that the staff spend their time researching possible mandating berms, encouraged staff in the TLUC to analyze municipalities, engage the Commonwealth Attorney, and indeed conduct geospatial analysis. All for a near tragedy, which was actually just a few individuals violating one of the paramount rules of gun safety: know your target and what is beyond. This is a prime example of the inefficiency of government that frustrates most voters from every party. Why? Because VA Code 18.256.1 allows for individuals to be charged with the reckless use of a firearm. And in fact, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office in that same June briefing indicated that 6 individuals had been charged under said code in the period 2016 September through May 2018. Further proof, in the November 7th, 2019 briefing, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office indicated that the September 8th, 2019 incident in which an individual was grazed by a bullet in the Gable Farm Lane area was charged under Virginia Code 18.256.1.
Sir, I'm sorry, your time is up.
Thank you. I thank you all for your time and your attention, and I hope that you collectively consider abandoning this.
Thank you, sir. Dan Brubaker will be our last speaker, but then I'll read the next 4 speakers before we take our break. Okay. Good evening, sir.
Thank you. And I asked permission. The opportunity passed earlier, so I wanted to make a few remarks on agenda item 3 before moving on to my comments. Thank you. Affordable housing is a focus group tested phrase, but it's a lie and a fraud. It's a lie because, number one, all housing where people live is affordable, or else they would not live there. And two, any place where no one lives is by definition not housing. Loudoun County has 0 unaffordable housing. Efforts to spend a lot of taxpayer money on so-called affordable housing are nothing more than politicians' attempt to buy votes by using taxpayers' hard-earned dollars to enable some people to live artificially beyond their means. This is unjust and generally un-American. There are stages of life. Society does not owe anyone a home or apartment in a prime neighborhood or even in the vicinity of their workplace. Nor is society made better when such unreasonable and unjust expectations are coddled. So I ask the board to reject and abandon injustice by rejecting and abandoning the term affordable housing. And on to agenda item 1, which is what we're talking about, so thank you for that opportunity. Number 1, I just, at a very high level, what we're talking about here with Second Amendment rights and so forth is derived from a natural right, which is the right to life. And as things come after the turn of the year and so forth, I just want to emphasize that the most dangerous, and point out that the most dangerous places in America are those places where there are higher levels of restrictions on the exercise of the Second Amendment rights. We have 3 daughters in Loudoun County Public Schools, and it concerns me every day that I send them to school that these places are among those places. So please, as you proceed, I ask that you do so with a light touch. Outlawing the discharge of a firearm within 100 yards of any permitted or occupied dwelling seems a little bit arbitrary to me. If the board in this matter wishes to address safety, then it should do so. Discharging a firearm in itself is not unsafe, need not harm or endanger property, need not harm or endanger any person, and firearms may be discharged safely in close proximity to a dwelling. Regulation of firearm discharge in Loudoun County should address reckless and dangerous acts by narrowly focusing upon those who do them. It should leave the rest of us who are responsible and careful with our firearms alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So before we take our break, the next 4 will be Terry Demansky, Melanie Miles, Mark Fell, and Mike Taylor. Those will be the next 4 people after we come back for a break. Supervisors, let's take a 10-minute break. Thank you, everybody. We are back, and we're going to go forward with speakers. And I do believe we stopped on Terry Demansky, Melanie Miles, Mark Fell, and Mike Taylor in that order. So we did Mr. Brubaker. So yeah, we're at Terry Demansky. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right. Are you here? Not here? Okay, Melanie Miles, are you here? Yes, ma'am. All right, Melanie Miles, thank you, ma'am. Mark Fell, Mike Taylor, and Jack Shockey. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Madam Chair and distinguished board. Thank you for allowing me to speak in this open forum. First, I'd like to say that I am in awe of the speakers that have gone before me for their passion and their eloquence, and I will only add and repeat what many of them have already said. My husband and I are responsible gun owners, and we are totally opposed to any and all new restrictions on personal gun control. If you enforce the existing laws and rules that exist today, there would be far less crime and acts of violence. Please do the job that is in place and stop infringing on the majority because of a few. Besides, if you look at DC and Chicago and some other cities where gun control only harms the innocent, please, you need to wake up and understand that it's people, not guns, that you have to worry about. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so, let's just make sure. Is there a Mark Fell here? Because Mark Sell came in way later, and I know, but this person was signed up well in advance, so we'll make sure that, so, yeah, but it's possible that there's a person named Mark Fell. So how about this? Mark Fell going once, going twice. Okay, Mark Sell, if you want to come. Mike Taylor, Jack Shockey, and Patricia Shockey. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Hopefully Mark Fell doesn't show up in 5 minutes.
Well, I did call in advance, so I should be on the list. So,
okay, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. I'll be brief because I don't think I can say anything new that hasn't already been said, but I will add my voice to those who are opposed to these amendments to the discharge of firearms ordinance. I would urge you to reject them. I believe they infringe on property rights and the right to keep and bear arms. I would also urge you to consider declaring Loudoun County a Second Amendment sanctuary. There is importance and value in that sort of thing, and I think it would be good for you all to stand with the residents of Loudoun and stand for the rights of Loudoun County residents to defend themselves both from individual self-defense and from tyrannical government. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mike Taylor, Jack Shockey, Patricia Shockey, Matthew Quist. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, fellow firearms owners that appreciate safety. My name is Mike Taylor. I'm a resident of Loudoun County in the Catoctin District. I note some of the speakers don't indicate where they're from. As an instructor, range safety officer, rule number 1, always keep your firearm pointed in a safe direction. Rule number 2, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Rule number 3, always keep your gun unloaded until you're ready to use it. Now, those first 3 rules are what gets you on my range starting in Cub Scouts as rising kindergartners. And by the end of the week, if you can't recite those rules to me, you don't get on my range. I take responsibility for know your target and what's beyond it, even though I do work with the kids on understanding that concept. But as the master of the range and the safety officer, it's my responsibility. As the boys grow up at 6th grade, they cross over into Boy Scouts and they move on to .22 caliber rifles. And then from there, I have private instruction that has gone well beyond that. I have never had a problem with things coming off my range because I drill in the safety. Now, the changes that are proposed in 684, I look at first 684 3D, where you add in the occupied dwellings. I understand that. I know that there are structures out here without building permits. Supervisor Higgins has one. It predates the building code by better than a century, and careless dove hunters on an adjacent property rained his roof with pellets, and he knew it because it's a tin roof. As far as the changes in E, all you're doing is codifying what any responsible firearm owner is going to avoid. Now, there were accusations at last meeting over Supervisor Higgins' motion saying that it was ceremonial. To a large degree, these changes, as proposed, are ceremonial. I am glad to see that the berming has been taken off. I would encourage you to go ahead and pass it tonight because, again, it just codifies what we're all doing, being responsible anyway. I'm afraid if it's forwarded to a future board, we're going to see the berms and all kinds of other restrictions come back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was Mr. Taylor, right? Okay. Jack Shockey, followed by Patricia Shockey, followed by Matthew Quist, followed by Robert Warfel.
Yes, my name is Lee Jackson Shockey, and I want to give you a little history first. I was born in Arcola, Virginia in 1947. So I've been in Loudoun County for a couple of weeks, and I want to start out with, I was a kid on about 123-acre pig farm. That's where I was born, and we were farmers until my father got a use permit for the Dulles, for the Chantilly Crushed Stone Company. And when he got that use permit, we were out of the farming business. And I think I was about 13 years old when we went on our first vacation. So I want to tell you that when I was a kid growing up, I started out with a BB gun, 22 shotgun, all under close supervision by my father. And if I ever made a mistake, that gun disappeared for months. He was serious and I was serious. I share that with you just so you get a little background. The next thing I want to talk to you about is I was president of Citizens for Property Rights in the year 2000 here in Loudoun County. There was a few board of supervisors thought it was cute to downgrade these farmers from 1 acre on 3 acres to 1 acre on 50 acres. Well, I can tell you what happened back then. We filed 192 lawsuits. We took it down to Richmond. Supreme Court overturned the downzoning. That was in about 2003. I'm not saying that whatever you pass may be subject, but there's a lot of cowboys behind me, and I'm sure they all know how to sue the government on some right that you might be impending on. So let's see what else is left. I guess that's about it. Needless to say, I'm against any and all regulations. I will give you one more little story. I have a neighbor who has a boy that's 13 years old, and the boy wanted to shoot a buck on my property with a bow and arrow. And he said, "Is that all right?" And I said, "Yeah, well, it'd be all right for two things, that you be with your 13-year-old boy when you do it." And he said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Shockey, we'll do that." And I guess he did shoot that deer, that buck, on my property with a bow and arrow. He was a 13-year-old boy learning something about life and death and deer and whatever. So the last thing I want to say is the next speaker is my wife, Patricia Shockey. Well, I could say this bluntly, but I'll try to keep my mouth.
I might want to just stop you before you say what you're about to say about your wife, Patricia Shockey.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. My wife is not going to be able to come. You wore her out by putting this as the last of the checklist. Okay. I thought that was a pretty quick trip.
Thank you,
she's
sir.
also
Sir,
she's also asked me.
Your time's up, Mr.
Well,
Shockey. Thank you. Nope, your time's up, sir.
Well, she's
Mr.
also
Shockey, your
asked me
time's
to
up,
say
sir.
she's
Mr.
against
Shockey.
it. All right.
Thank you, ma'am, sir. All right. Patricia, oh, she's not here. Okay. Matthew Quist, followed by Robert Warfel, followed by Melinda Skinner, followed by Paul Kershaw. Good evening, sir.
My name is Matthew Quist. I've been a resident of Loudoun County for 27 years. I've also been a firefighter in this county for almost 8 years. With that, my opinions are not the opinions of my department. Okay. I am against any further regulations against the use of firearms in this county, as it is an erosion on the Second Amendment. Now that I've stated that, there is another issue concerning this board that I feel strongly against that needs to be voiced, all right? And that is concerning your actions on December 3rd in accordance with the discussion on what's happening in Richmond, all right? This board, in that meeting, and for those who want to look it up, it is at the 3-hour and 50-minute mark at which this point starts. This board was saying statements like, this is a waste of our time. This is people throwing an adult temper tantrum because they didn't get their way. I don't get why people are overwhelming our offices with this issue. This doesn't concern the people of Loudoun County. I ask you, what is your job? Is it to tell us what we are to be concerned about? Is it to tell us what wastes time? No. Your job is to sit up there and listen. We are the people, and you as public servants are to serve the public. Your responsibility is to listen to the public and act in accordance to their will as their elected representative, not as an elected ruler. Now, with that statement, me as a firefighter, if someone's to call 911, and my response is, this is a waste of my time, I refuse to act. I say that I don't get why they're calling me. This isn't an issue that concerns me. This isn't an issue that concerns them. If that were to happen, I would be stripped of my rank as an officer. I would be removed from my department, and I would not be allowed to participate as a public official in this county. All right? Now, I'm not demanding that you are removed from your seats, but I am demanding that you, in conjunction with the people in their statements here, act upon their will. That is all.
Thank you, sir. Robert Warfel, Melinda Skinner, Paul Kershew, and Greg Stone. Good evening.
Good evening. Uh-oh, there go my notes. Shoot. Man. I hit a button and now my notes went away.
That's okay. We're not going to start your time. Do you start talking? Okay. It's fine.
Oh, I can't find it now. Well, that's embarrassing. I work in the computer industry and I can't find my notes. Okay. I have no thunder left. All my thunder's been stolen for this evening. I would like to point out, though, a lot of people said that our right to bear arms is granted by the Second Amendment. That is not correct. It's an inalienable right that the Second Amendment was written to protect. James Madison came up with these because of the Anti-Federalists. He wanted to make sure that everybody was happy and started writing them down. And, he said, where should I start? Well, freedom of speech, pretty important, freedom of religion. Let's lump those two together. What's next? How are we going to protect the first one? I guess we'll have to have firearms in there, right? Could have very easily been first, because without the Second Amendment, the rest of our rights are gone. We have no way to protect ourselves. So I just want to bring up the point that everybody else has made so far, that I don't feel like anything that we're talking about here tonight as far as the amendments to the ordinances are going to change the ability to enforce the laws that are already on the books. And that I think part of the issue that we have is training. Part of that falls on the firearms community that's here tonight. We need to make sure that our fellow firearms users are trained properly. We need to make sure that the law enforcement officers are trained properly on how to investigate these acts of negligence, and that the prosecutors know how to prosecute them, obviously. Get them trained if they need it. But realistically, somebody pointed out already how small this problem is. If you look at how many acts of property damage or injury are caused by distracted or drunk motor vehicles, motor vehicle operators, somebody brought up before. A distracted driver, drunk driver, has a 3 to 5 second reaction time. At 45 miles an hour, that's 66 feet per second. That's somewhere between 66 and 100 yards. Are we going to pass an ordinance that doesn't let you drive within 100 yards of somebody's house? I mean, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. That's the rationality here. I mean, and it just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to have to go with everybody else and say I hope we don't have to infringe any more on our rights already. We've got laws in the books. This does not help us enforce those laws, and I hope you'll reject these ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Robert Warfield, Melinda Skinner, I'm sorry, that was Robert Warfield. Melinda Skinner, Paul Kershaw, Greg Stone, and Mark Hall. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. It's actually Madeline Skinner, but that's okay.
Okay, well, it says Melinda. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I've lived in Loudoun County for almost 30 years, and I continue to be saddened by the ongoing destruction of our rural way of life in this beautiful county. Recent amendments to the codified ordinances of discharge of firearms complicates an existing law that needs to be and should have been enforced. It's out there, reckless use of a firearm. To reward it to say projectile leaving the boundaries of the property, bottom line, responsible gun owner, target shooter, the law's already out there. It's the job of everyone to support the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office to do their job, to successfully charge those who are irresponsible in their gun use. For the last year and a half, there's been a large amount of time and tax dollars spent on an outcome that already existed, just not enforced. So please help the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office and those that need to do their job to do their job. Increasing to 100 yards from the previous 50 yards from a regularly occupied structure obviously is going to impact a lot of people. I've looked at the map, I've looked at the blue circles. It's really going to impact a lot of current landowners from being able to target shoot on their property. All this recent activity is nothing more than the continued attack on our Second Amendment rights. These ongoing over-restrictive gun laws are just part of an anti-gun movement that lends itself to the current ongoing attack being conducted at a state level. Many of us know we have a huge fight ahead, not only at the county level, but at the state level to keep our rights. While there have not been any decisions in Richmond made in Richmond yet, we as a county need to send the message that we will not stand idly by as our Bill of Rights are threatened, our Second Amendment rights are threatened, resulting in overall erosion of our constitutional rights. We must be diligent, we must be mindful, we must protect our rights. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Paul Kershaw, Greg Stone, Mark Hall, and Michael Orsinger. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board, good evening. My name is Paul Kershaw, Algonquin District. I've been a resident of Eastern Loudoun County for 20 years. I come before you tonight in part to convey my concern over the amendment before the board, commonly being referred to as the bullet trespass amendment. Although this motion appears to provide additional protections to our neighbors without punitively compromising the property rights of citizens, the use of the phrase prima facie evidence concerns me. While I'm not a lawyer, this appears to shift the burden of proof of innocence to the accused. I have concerns with that approach and encourage you to proceed with great caution in this area. The words innocent until proven guilty come to mind. Now, having said this, I feel compelled to convey to you my profound disappointment in the partisan theatrics that I witnessed at your last meeting. I, as you, swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, including the Second Amendment. As are all politics, this is a local issue. I assure you that this is not a political stunt. It is never a waste of time, and it is not a temper tantrum. Recognizing that we all oppose the irresponsible and unlawful use of firearms, I call upon each and every one of you tonight to take a stand with an up or down vote on December 17th as to whether you will uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, in particular in regard to the Second Amendment sanctuary process. Thank you for your time, and good evening.
Thank you, sir. Greg Stone, followed by Mark Hall, followed by Michael Orsinger, followed by Robert Flynn. Mr. Stone? Mr. Stone, are you here? Okay. Mark Hall, I'm sorry, it's Mark Hall, followed by Michael Orsinger, followed by Robert Flynn, followed by Michael Dela Cruz. Mark Hall? Mr. Hall? Not here? Okay. Michael Orsinger, followed by Robert Flynn, followed by Michael Dela Cruz, followed by Jay Manchart, I do believe. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Before I start, how's your mother?
She called me to tell me she found a cheap airline ticket.
Very good. Very good.
She's fine. But thank you. Thank you for asking, though.
It's good news.
So, yeah.
All right.
But I didn't know, so, I take my mom's
You
calls.
never know in these situations.
Yeah, thank you, though.
I'm a senior citizen myself, so I have those concerns. So other members of the board as well. My name is Michael Orsinger. I'm a longtime Loudoun County resident. And my comments reflect only my personal opinion as a citizen of Loudoun, as a gun owner, as a firearms instructor, as a father, and a past leader of scouts and so forth. The matter for discussion, the proposed amendment to Chapter 68403 codified ordinance regarding and/or regularly occupied structure, and to add a new subsection to the ordinance. To the best of my knowledge, these proposed changes were occasioned by some occurrences regarding errant rounds. I can understand the concern about that. I don't like hot lead flying over me either. The Sheriff's Office has followed up on many of these instances appropriately, and my understanding is there is not an issue in prosecuting these items except particular culpability. I'm a longtime firearms instructor. I've taught hundreds of scouts, hundreds of adults, Loudoun County school teachers, even a number of persons in this room. I admonish every student that one of the cardinal rules of firearms usage is be sure of your target and what's beyond it. I am 2 months short of 74 years age. I've been shooting since I was about 6 years old. And all this time, and I've put thousands of rounds down range every single year. I'm a competitive shooter as well. I've never accidentally fired a round or hit a dwelling or a person. We're not lacking for regulation. We have plenty of those. We lack education. Years gone by, fathers, uncles, friends, coaches, etc., taught us these rules of firearms safety. What is being addressed is the present lack of education. It's not being addressed, excuse me. That is where I suggest we need to look. I think we need to have education back in the schools like we used to, Hunter's Ed and things like that. I thank you for your attention to this matter. I think we should be a constitutional sanctuary. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for inquiring about my mother. That was very kind of you. Robert Flynn, followed by Michael Dela Cruz, followed by Jay, I think it's Murchart, and followed by Phil Opresti. Robert Flynn? Robert Flynn. By the way, if anyone's in the Dulles room still, there is room in the boardroom. If you can hear me, there's room in the boardroom now. Okay, Michael Dela Cruz, followed by Jay Murchart, followed by Phil Opresti. Excuse me. I know, I see him. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I'm Michael Dela Cruz. This is the second time that I've addressed the board on this issue. My comments today represent myself. They don't represent my business or my employer. I've lived in Ron Meyer's district since 2006. I have been shooting on 200 acres in Rouse district since 2016, roughly. The last time I was in front of this board, I pointed out that the 4 basic rules of gun safety, which a lot of people have already pointed out in the past, were violated in a couple different occasions. The thing that I'd like to point out is that the working group recommended additional education outreach to the community and providing resources to law enforcement. Where's the result of that? I haven't seen anything from this board, from the county, giving any kind of firearms education or talking to the NRA about the Eddie Eagle program to help educate youth on firearm safety. I've not seen any of those results from the working group. On face 68403 about bullet trespass, I don't disagree with that. I disagree with berms because I understand that in 1 year you'll say the berm has to have 1 requirements, and then when the incidents happen again, you're going to make the berm requirements even greater. It also allows the county to come and intrude on property rights and inspect your berm. So I'm glad that that is now off the table. I appreciate that. Lastly, you guys saw this room. You saw it packed with people that believe in their civil rights and their Second Amendment rights. I would urge this board to reconsider at some point in the future adding Loudoun County as a Second Amendment sanctuary. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, sir. And our last speaker this evening is Phil Lopresti. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Supervisors and my fellow citizens. Phil Lopresti, Blue Ridge and Broad Run Districts. I want to thank you for taking on this issue. A couple things I want to note. Number one, responsible gun owner, I certainly appreciate the comments of some of my fellow citizens here. I know we have some people from outside of Loudoun, and welcome to Leesburg. But also, I'm wearing a red shirt tonight, and I'm very proud of the work that the Moms Demand Action Group has done. I'm also wearing the camo, so I spend a lot of time in the woods. I appreciate what's going on here, but I want to refocus. I think part of the reason you guys have proposed this is because you want to make it easier for the deputies and the sheriffs to enforce this. And so I appreciate that. We're not going to restrict people's rights. This is a common sense thing. So add my name to another person that supports this legislation. I do think we could fix some other parts to make it a little better. The 100-yard rule is a specific thing. It's not always safer to be 100 yards from property line. In the case of my farm, you're safer to be right on the property line with your back to somebody's house and shooting into the property. But that's for another day or another board. But I would certainly tell you, number one, I support this. The second thing I want to tell you is a unique piece of testimony, which I don't know how many people, I heard one guy say he's never had his neighbor shoot at him. Well, that actually happened to me. I had a neighbor, my father and I were out cutting firewood, and I had a neighbor discharge a weapon. I called the police, the sheriff, and I do want to support Sheriff Chapman and Major Hines. They have done a great job at trying to educate the public on this. But about 15 years ago when this happened, the deputy basically said unless they saw it, they could not prosecute reckless discharge. It was just incredible that they couldn't pursue something like that. And this was a weapon that was discharged on a parcel of less than 2 acres in an ag district. And my farm's over 30. But the point is, we've got to do something to make it easier. Nobody wants to see what happened in Blacksburg and all these other places. And we know this isn't about mass shootings, but we have evidence on what happened in the last year. So I'll add one last thing, which is we all have a connection to this. For me, I went to Virginia Tech. It was a horrifying day when that happened in April of 2007. But my wife also has a cousin that lives in Newtown. I mean, we know that the world is changing. Over 4 decades in Loudoun County, we are not the same county we used to be. We have to get a handle on this before we wake up one day and somebody is hit and are in the hospital.
Thank you, Mr. Lopresti.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lopresti. I appreciate it. Sir, I'm sorry if I missed you before. Is M-E-R-C-H-A-R-T?
My last name is Merchant, M-E-R-C-H-A-N-T. My first name is Jay.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
First off, I am a retired 35-year police officer of Fairfax County and Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. I retired quite a few years ago, but I want to tell you that to make more laws that you cannot enforce is probably the worst thing this board can do or anyone else. There's laws on the books that it's like any other crime. You have to investigate. Sometimes you get the evidence to make a case. Sometimes you don't. But there's 2 issues I'd like to point out. I'd like for this group on the board to just think about how many thousands of rounds that is fired in this county and for what number of shots that have gone into a house or whatever. It's amazing that it's a testament already by itself of how careful people are that have guns. I can't overemphasize that. And the second thing I'd like to say, and I'm probably going to upset some people, but I'm going to say it. We are living in a time when Obama's FBI, the Department of Justice, the Internal Revenue Service, CIA, were involved in horrible things in our country, and I hope they wound up paying the penalty for that. But if it happened in our federal government, it can happen to our own people in the state of Virginia. That's why the people that wrote the Constitution, the Second Amendment, that's why it's there, because that's the only recourse we have when the government takes things in their own hands and does things that are illegal. That's why they don't do it, because they know there are people out here with guns, and they would organize and they would protect themselves and the things, whatever. So I find it incredible that we're living in a time when what has happened to our federal government, but the warning is it could happen to a state government, it could happen to a county government. So I am obviously very opposed to anything that is going to try to take away from our God-given Second Amendment rights through the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would prefer if you all not do that, because I don't, at this late date, want to recess the board. We only have one more speaker. Let's not recess the board for one more speaker. One more speaker actually came and signed up. No, just one. I just have one more, unless I missed something. I was handed the name of Stephen Boring as our last speaker of the evening. Thank you. Good evening, young man.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
My name is Stephen Boring. I would like to propose a resolution in which Loudoun County declares that it will not use its county resources to enforce unconstitutional and ineffective firearm laws that are forthcoming from the state legislature that will have an impact on county residents and local law enforcement, such as red flag laws, magazine capacity limits, bans on semi-automatic firearms with specific features, and private firearm transfer restrictions. This proposal does not violate the Dillon Rule, as it does not legalize magazines, weapons, or transfer. This proposal only guides the enforcement of laws. My proposal is rooted in 4 key arguments that I will address briefly. Red flag laws forego due process, evidence of a crime trial by jury, and an individual's right to private property. Red flag laws create a slippery slope where the ill-willed could target those they oppose, and law enforcement could selectively determine who constitutes as a threat. Private firearm transfer restrictions are used universal background checks that require a de facto gun registry to enforce compliance. The Supreme Court ruled people who are prohibited from possessing firearms cannot be compelled to register them, as it violates the Fifth Amendment. Research suggests that universal background checks have no measurable effect. I believe this idea is well-intentioned, but it would be nothing more than feel-good policy that places a useless burden on lawful gun owners. Restrictions on magazine capacity and firearm features only limit the law-abiding and cannot affect behaviors of dangerous individuals. These types of restrictions have low compliance rates. These restrictions only target one type of gun violence, multiple homicide shootings. Contrary to popular belief, fire rate is not crucial in multiple homicide shootings due to the majority of victims being unarmed and often dispersed. Reloading a firearm has little effect on an assailant's average rate of fire. However, these restrictions will have negative impacts on law-abiding citizens in Loudoun County who find themselves in lawful self-defense scenarios, specifically those with multiple assailants. Semi-automatic firearms are commonplace and proven to be effective in self-defense scenarios. Rate of fire is crucial when defending yourself against an armed assailant, unlike in mass shootings. Police officers use an average of 10 rounds per assailant. Semi-automatic rifles are far more controllable and operable, making them safer to use than handguns. Limiting type of firearm and magazine capacity only results in making firearms less safe and operable in an event that a citizen would need to use it to defend themselves and their loved ones. These hasty gun control laws will force people to choose between protecting themselves and their family or facing a Class 6 felony for using the most effective tool to preserve life, instead of what policymakers have decided is good enough. I do not want this to be mistaken as partisan allegiance. I want to be clear that gun violence, citizens' rights, allocation of county funds, and duties of Loudoun County law enforcement all pertain to Loudoun County residents.
Your time is up. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming out to speak. I know that was a long time, but you guys hung in there with us, and we appreciate it. This originally was Mr. Buffington's motion when, gosh, I guess that was, how long's that been now, a month? No, I mean, this motion was Mr. Buffington's motion, but Mr. Buffington and Mr. Myers have spoken, and Mr. Meyer is going to make the motion this evening.
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Meyer? Yes, sir.
was
Yes.
me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just had a clarification.
Okay.
In response to the inquiry at the top of the meeting about the word adjacent, we do have an alternative language. The way that sheet works, Mr. Meyer, as you can tell, is that if you're going to move to suspend and move these amendments tonight, we would still need the first part of the motion from the staff report, which is regarding the occupancy permit. That's on page 4 and 5 of the staff report, which is also 4 and 5 in the iPad. So we still need that portion as well. Thank you.
Got it. Madam Chair, I will move that the Board of Supervisors suspend the rules.
Motion's been made for suspension of the rules. I will give that motion to second to Supervisor Buffington. Discussion on that motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? That motion will pass. It's still 8 of us. It's still 8-0. Thank you. Mr. Meyer? 801, yeah.
Madam Chair, I move that the Board of Supervisors approved and adopt amended language to the codified ordinances of Loudoun County, Section 684.03D. The discharge of firearms is prohibited within 100 yards of a building with a current occupancy permit and/or regularly occupied structure unless the owner or authorized agent has given permission, as provided in the Attachment 1, December 11, 2019 Board of Supervisors Public Hearing Staff Report. I further move that the Board of Supervisors approve and adopt new language creating new Section 684.03E in the codified ordinances of Loudoun County stating, the discharge of firearms for recreational or target shooting purposes shall be conducted in such a manner as to ensure that projectiles do not leave the boundaries of the property or parcel upon which the shooting is occurring, unless permission to do so has been granted by the owner of the property or parcel upon which the projectile lands. A projectile leaving the boundaries of the property or parcel shall be prima facie evidence of a violation of this section.
Motion's made by Supervisor Meyer, seconded by Supervisor Umstattd. Discussion on the motion, Mr. Meyer.
So first of all, I want to thank Supervisor Buffington. He launched, I think, the working group and study that started this, but obviously keeping it going was something that Supervisor Turner and I've had to work closely on as well as the full board, so I appreciate him make the motion. Partially, we had a little bit of a conflict during the public hearing. I hadn't seen his language yet, but the more research I did on his language, the more I actually was swayed to his opinion, because I actually think that that requiring for folks to shoot in such a manner as to keep projectiles on the property is actually broader language, but still gets to the point of you have to contain your round on your property, which is the entire intent, whether that's whatever type of shooting you're doing. And so I actually think that language is the most enforceable because it is broader and gives our law enforcement the best chance of charging them and our prosecutors of actually convicting these people. And to be clear, no one has been successfully convicted yet in our board term of the 20 instances where this has happened. People have been charged. No one has been convicted. There is a difference. And so that's exactly why we're here. We've had 20 instances of where target shooting has resulted in people's property or persons being hit. And that's what this board has set out to try to help stop or prevent or at least punish. Because right now, the opinion of our legal community is essentially that reckless discharge is borderline impossible to prove in court. And for two reasons. One, because of the reckless designation. You have to prove recklessness, not just that someone shot someone else's property. You have to prove they're being reckless. And that is legally a very high standard of proof. This one drops that reckless language. And so you have a lower burden of proof. Secondly, this also has to do with the manner of which the shooting is occurring, not just the fact that you don't have to specifically necessarily prove that an individual person shot an individual bullet. The manner and the context is important too. And so if people are target shooting in such a manner that is clearly going to have rounds leave the property, that is now prosecutable. And so that's why I support this language. I appreciate the full board seeing this out after 18 months. There were proposals that would have prohibited discharge within 880 yards of a house, which obviously would have essentially prohibited shooting and hunting in Western Loudoun. Those proposals didn't go forward. Instead, we launched a pretty thorough process into looking at what is the the best way to try to solve the problems that we're having, trying to be more of a scalpel versus a bludgeon. And in the process of exploring a lot of things, obviously a lot of us have taken a lot of heat. But I think at the end of the day, this proposal isn't a panacea. It's not, pardon the pun, a silver bullet, but it is a step forward in giving our law enforcement and prosecutors a chance of punishing bad actors.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Letourneau?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be voting in favor of the proposal this evening. We heard a number of arguments, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I think we proved the First Amendment's alive and well in this country, and that's a darn good thing. We heard that this issue is not a problem. Well, even as the board was discussing this issue, the number of incidents continued to happen. Some of the public obviously wasn't aware of all those incidents because they didn't make the news, because only certain ones did. But we're over dozens at this point. And if you go back in time, they started piling up. Another argument was there's already laws on the books that address this, except not one person has actually been convicted of any of those individual incidents. There have been individuals that have been convicted of reckless discharge, but of these specific incidents that we've been looking at, which have been target shooting incidents, it's been impossible to prove that. And I have to just take a moment on that. Our Commonwealth attorney is not incompetent. Our sheriff's office is not incompetent. I've heard throughout this debate that we somehow have a problem with our law enforcement who, for some reason, aren't doing their jobs because they're not prosecuting these individuals. At a certain point, the problem is not with law enforcement. It's not with the Commonwealth attorney. It's the fact that the law itself isn't getting at the problem. And that's why we're having this discussion. I also heard that responsible gun owners already follow these rules. There's 4 rules of safety. And that's true. And that's why this ordinance tonight is not a threat to anybody who does, because it's only a threat if the bullet leaves the property in which it was shot without the permission of the person for whom it's receiving or the adjacent property owner. That's the only person in here who should be concerned about this language, somebody who does that. Otherwise, for everybody out there, which I believe is the vast majority of people who wouldn't put themselves in that position in the first place, this isn't a problem. We're getting at the bad actors here. We're getting at the folks for whom, for whatever reason, haven't taken this seriously. And it's happened enough times now. And yes, I understand we had a lot of people turn out tonight, but over the course of several years now, the board has heard from lots and lots and lots of citizens who are concerned about this and want us to try to stop it. And that's a reasonable thing to do. Now, I understand there's a lot of other issues out there. There's a lot of concerns about what's happening in Richmond and the General Assembly. That's not what's on our agenda tonight. The reality is what's on our agenda is a very narrowly crafted solution that may not solve the entire problem, but it's certainly not going to hurt. If nothing else, it's going to be a deterrent out there to a problem that we have in our county, that we as the Board of Supervisors are trying to address because the General Assembly, even under Republican control, has specifically given us the ability and the authority in the statute to address and pass an ordinance such as this one. And that's why we're doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Ms. Umstead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the members of Moms Demand Action who are here, and I also want to thank the folks who are here in their mind supporting the Second Amendment. This does not violate any part of the Second Amendment, and I think every gun owner in this county, and especially those who are here tonight, is most likely a very responsible gun owner and would never purposely or hopefully even inadvertently shoot across someone else's land. Because as much as the gun owners here believe in their own property rights, I know you also respect the property rights of your neighbors. And it's a violation of the property rights of any of us to have reckless shooters shooting into our homes, wounding our family members, as happened with one lady, or even shooting around a tree stand of a neighbor who was on his property, and peppering the branches with shot. These are things that I don't think any of you would advocate doing any of that. But we have to acknowledge that while protecting your property rights, we also need to protect the property rights of those who live around you or others who shoot. And all this does is protect everybody's property rights, yours as well as everybody else's. It does not limit your ability to use the gun. All of you already do it responsibly, I'm quite sure of that. But it limits the ability of reckless shooters to violate other people's property rights, and I am happy to support it.
Thank you, Ms. Umstead. Mr. Saines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item before the board is because we've had several incidents where stray bullets have hit homes, wounded a person. Government has an obligation to keep the public safe. These incidences have not yielded a successful prosecution, which has brought this action forward. I took an oath, like every other board member here, to uphold the United States Constitution and the Virginia Constitution. I support the Second Amendment, just like I support every other part of the Constitution. However, rights come with responsibilities. The First Amendment does not mean you falsely yell fire in the theater. As even Justice Scalia said, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. What we are voting on tonight is a simple, limited measure that is necessary to ensure public safety. Imagine if you're in your backyard having a family barbecue or a baby shower, and your house is hit by a stray bullet because of the recklessness and negligence of another person. That would be unacceptable to you, and it should be. Where we can prevent tragedy, we should, and therefore that's why I'm voting yes on this measure tonight. Thank you. And thank you all for coming out to speak and using your First Amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Buffington?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I first want to thank all of the speakers who came out this evening. Much appreciated, and we are happy to hear from you all. One thing, I'm just going to have a couple of comments based on what I heard from, in general, from the speakers. The first thing is that it was alleged that we're creating a new law that says you can't shoot within 100 yards of an occupied dwelling. That's an existing law on the books. We're making a minor change to that to make sure that the county, if someone actually shoots and violates that law, the county doesn't have to produce a occupancy permit in court. Because some of these buildings, like my house, was built in the 1930s, with an addition in the 1970s. There's probably a permit for the 70s. I doubt there's a permit for the 30s part. And there's homes that were built before America was America in 1770. I mean, I know people whose homes have been here in Loudoun County long before America was America. And obviously, there's not going to be occupancy permits for that. Other things that were said, that we are voting away private property rights. We are absolutely not voting away private property rights. We're saying shoot on your property, but don't infringe on your neighbor's right to not have your bullets fly through his property or her property. It was said that we are infringing on the rights to hunting and shooting on private property. Number one, hunting is not involved in this. This has nothing to do with hunting. That's a separate issue. This is about recreational and target shooting. So we are not infringing on the right of hunting. And again, we are not infringing on anybody's right to shoot on private property. Encourage it. Shoot on private property, but keep your bullet on your private property unless you have permission for that bullet to go onto your neighbor's property. That's all this is. And as many of you stated when you spoke to us, you absolutely agree with that. And if you follow the 4 weapon safety rules or gun safety rules, whatever you want to call them, then you'll never violate this. And I don't think any reasonable, and I'm just repeating what I said earlier, no reasonable and responsible gun owner should have a problem with this. We are not infringing upon Second Amendment rights. What we're doing is responding to situations that have occurred since this board took office in January 1st of 2016. Over 20 times this has occurred that we know of. I'm sure it's occurred a lot more that we don't know of, because unless someone knows that something happened, then we don't know what happened while we weren't at home or they weren't at home or whatever. 20 instances. Yes, people have been charged with reckless discharge, but no, none of them have been convicted. This creates a lower standard, and the current Commonwealth attorney based on the email I got from Leo Rogers, who is the county attorney today, said that this will make it easier to prosecute these offenses in Loudoun County. That's all we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Buffington. Mr. Bona.
Yes, thank you. Let me thank everybody for coming out. I really appreciate everybody being here, and I'm with you, okay? I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I understand where your frustrations are coming from, but make sure you aim them in the right place. You, like I, should be terrified at some of the pre-filing of bills that has happened in Richmond. And if you go look at some of those bills, especially a certain Senate bill, they're beyond belief, okay? Beyond belief. I mean, everybody in this room, myself included, would be a felon the minute it passes, okay? And that's, to me, that's just illegal confiscation, potential illegal search and seizure. It violates another amendment of the Constitution, okay? The Bill of Rights is there for a reason. And to try to hide behind some of these bills being proposed, I mean, having a clip with more than 10 rounds makes you a felon for your Glock? Come on. And that's what these do. So if you want to speak and exercise your First Amendment, you need to be doing that to our folks in Richmond, because that's important. These are the consequences you get when one political party has everything. There's no checks and balances anymore. And the extremes of the party then begin to control. And that's what's about to happen in Richmond. Now, to come back to what's happening here, I'm not going to support this. One thing that wasn't said is it does change the distance in the ordinance from 50 feet to 100 feet, okay? That was never said, but if you heard the first part of the motion, it is in there. It's right there in the packet. The second part of it is this doesn't solve the problem. And why I have huge respect for Supervisor Buffington. He's a Capitol Police officer. He carries a weapon every day at work, okay? I have a tremendous amount of respect. He didn't tell you that, he didn't finish the sentence from the county attorney we got today. It did say that there could be a presumption created when the bullet leaves the property that could make it easier to enforce. What he didn't say, though, is that in any event, the Commonwealth can only prosecute the person who discharged the weapon. I'm reading the rest of the email he read part of. Determining that person's identity is still a law enforcement issue. This doesn't solve that. That's the reason I can't support that. It doesn't solve it. You still have the same problem that we have right now if this passes. Because if 5 of you are out there blinking and, one round goes off, how do they know which one of you is firing? They don't. We have that problem right now. That's why we haven't prosecuted. The ones we have prosecuted, most reckless discharge prosecutions come because somebody was cleaning their gun while it was loaded and they shot themselves in the leg or something. That does happen. It happens more than you think in this county. Or it goes through the wall in a townhome into their neighbor's yard. But the fact of it is, it doesn't solve the core problem of who fired the weapon. And until you know that, you really can't prosecute somebody. You can't prosecute me for a round that Supervisor Volpe fired. And this doesn't solve that. So I can't support it. Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank everybody for coming, and thank you for staying with us all evening. I have said many times, and I have no trouble saying that this is not a field that I was knowledgeable about or an expert in. And there are people in this room who I have called because I had questions. But what I have found is the more I study it and the more I go try to get knowledgeable, the more kind of appalled I get at some things, including what Mr. Bona just said. You can't figure out who shot the weapon, so no one gets charged. And I've said more than once, the moment somebody is killed, I bet they'll figure out who shot that weapon. And the statement of and I've heard it a couple times here tonight, well, nothing's happened, so it's no big deal. Well, that's easy to say because no one has somebody's been grazed, but no one's been killed. The moment somebody gets killed, even if it's just one time, it becomes a big deal. And we'll probably figure out who shot that weapon. There are a lot of things that as I've studied it more and more, and I have, listen, if I don't know something, I have no trouble saying I don't know it, and I will go study it. But studying it has put me less at ease than I thought I would be. Supervisor, Mr. Yudd, I think there was a question asked here tonight that you may not have the answer to right now, but at some point if you can get back to me or anybody else with the answer of, we did actually say that some education should be done on a countywide basis. We talked about how to do that, putting things on website, putting posters up in places, and we maybe haven't actually had a discussion on that.
I can
and
address
so, so that is maybe an answer that I would want to have. The idea that we won't that and I believe you guys are responsible gun owners. Responsible gun owners would have any issue with your rounds not going into somebody else's yard. I would think because you're responsible gun owners, you would support that. And the last thing is, it was said a couple of times that this board shouldn't continue to erode gun laws or shouldn't continue to pass gun laws. This board has passed nothing. This is the first thing that we're actually take a vote on that may or may not pass. This board at this moment, nothing has passed. And so we're not continuing to do anything. And finally, one thing I did learn, and I think Mr. Buffington was right, and many of you who spoke last time was right, the Birmingham idea was a bad idea. It was a bad idea, and once I really went and researched that, I realized it was a bad idea and a really, really costly idea. And so I realized that probably shouldn't happen. But rounds leaving people's property, I don't think that should happen either. So I will be absolutely supporting this. Thank you. Hi, Mr. Higgins. How are you? Do you want to speak on the motion that you've not maybe heard? Do you want to hear the motion before you?
Oh, I'm familiar with the motion.
Okay, if you want to speak on the motion, Mr. Higgins, go for it.
Thank you, Madam
Actually,
Chair.
Mr. Higgins, with all respect, the motion did change. Do you want to see it?
Couple words different.
I didn't say it changed by much. I said it changed.
Looks pretty similar to the other one, but thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for getting here as late as I have, but at least I was able to get here. I heard some of the conversation and debate tonight on the way in, and certainly there's nobody at this dais that doesn't want to see firearms used in a safe manner and people's property rights protected, and in a responsible manner as well. Having said that, I don't see where this particular addition to the ordinances in Loudoun County solves that problem. It adds another layer of codified ordinance, but it still does not solve the problem that is essential to the issue, and that is who actually fired the round, wherever it went. And I believe that in the conversations that we had, both at our previous meetings on this and tonight, I don't know of anybody from law enforcement that has said, or from the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office that said that this is any more enforceable than the other reckless discharge of a firearm, because unless you know who fired the round and who pulled the trigger, you don't have the evidence to prosecute. So the problem doesn't change. And I, for one, absolutely do not support the use of firearms in a reckless manner where rounds strike somebody else's property. But at the same time, this isn't the solution to that problem. And one of the things that we started out in the beginning of the conversation on these issues was that we needed to have better firearms training and better firearms information available through the county and to the population of the county so that they would be knowledgeable on the safe use and safest uses of a firearm. So while I think this motion may make some people feel good, I don't see where it makes any difference in trying to solve the problem. And so I will not be supporting it. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I appreciate your passion and your voice. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be here sooner, but better late than never. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Yett, would you like to answer that question before we go to Mr. Meyer's closing?
Yes, Madam Chair. When we reported back to the board on November 7th, we did note that the board had previously given direction on preparing public outreach and additional information to help as training resources and informational resources to the community. The Public Affairs and Communications staff has indicated that upon approval of the codified ordinances, the amendments where you end up tonight, they will be moving forward with detailed information regarding the specific ordinance changes, the importance of using firearms safely, identifying safety training opportunities, and where to locate safe shooting venues. In addition, at the same time, since 2018, the Sheriff's Office video regarding safe shooting has been getting a great deal of hits from the public, and that continues to be a good resource. But we would continue to move forward with the previously adopted public outreach plan upon approval of these amendments.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer, would you like to close, please?
Yes, first thing is I'm going to playfully remind Supervisor Bona to read his packet and ask Mr. Yudd what our current prohibition is from a occupied structure with an occupancy permit. Is it 50 yards or 100 yards?
100.
It's 100 yards. The prohibition is on from a road is 50 yards, I think, which is where you're getting confused. However, that prohibition is not mentioned in the packet. Second, I want to say that basically there's an argument that's saying this isn't prosecutable either. If nothing is prosecutable, if reckless discharge isn't prosecutable, if this new law, which has a much lower burden of proof, isn't prosecutable, and literally nothing is prosecutable, and we're shooting in a group, and literally there's no consequences for our actions when you're target shooting in a group, that's a problem. That's what leads to arguments to ban shooting in Western Loudoun, which, by the way, the Republican-controlled General Assembly gave localities the authority to do. We have the authority to expand it from 100 yards to 880 yards like was proposed. So you know what? In my opinion, we better figure out how to prosecute these. We better figure out how to prosecute these. This is lowering the burden of proof, getting rid of reckless, so you don't have to prove recklessness, and also saying that people have to shoot in such a manner as to contain the bullet in their property. That means you don't necessarily have to tie the bullet directly to the shooter. You have to show that shooters were shooting in such a manner that would have led the bullet to have left the property. So that is different, and that's exactly why we've crafted this the way we have, is to try to give it another shot so it doesn't lead to further regulations. Because I'll tell you, as soon as someone gets shot again, or as soon as multiple people keep getting hit, and we see these instances all the time, even ones that aren't reported to the sheriff's office, there's going to be a lot bigger restrictions coming, especially with the makeup of the next board. So we better figure out how to prosecute this, and this is why we're trying to move forward with that. And the answer is, well, we should just do nothing. I'm telling you, that's just a ticking time bomb, especially with the by-right development happening in Western Loudoun. It's just a ticking time bomb. And so finally, I want to finish on a more positive note. I wore this tie on purpose. It is a red tie, and obviously some folks are wearing red tonight, but it also, if you see, it has little inscriptions on it. It says 1776. So it's a show of compromise. I think tonight what we're doing is something that is both constitutional and supportive of gun safety. And I think that those two things can be merged together. I think it's exactly what this board is doing on a bipartisan basis, and I will support this motion.
Okay, the motion that was made by Supervisor Meyer and seconded by Supervisor Umstead. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? No. That motion will pass 6-3 with Mr. Higgins, Ms. Volpe, and Mr. Bona voting against the motion. Thank you. Mr. Bona, we have to go back into closed session. Would you please read us back in, sir?
I move that the Board of Supervisors recess this public meeting and enter into closed session pursuant to Section 2.23711A1
I'm sorry.
Virginia.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss something?
We need you to close the public hearing. We
We do have to close public hearing. I'm sorry. All right, before we go, okay. I'm sorry. I have to, you're right. Okay, so the public hearing is adjourned. And then we want to wait 5 minutes?
Yeah, we
Okay.
need to.
Okay.
That's a